Welcome to the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. I'm Mark Rozelle. I serve as Dean of the Schar School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Technology Leadership, a Conversation with Keith Krach, Chairman of the Center for Tech Diplomacy. And he is former Chairman and CEO of DocuSign, co-founder of Ariba, and former Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. And he is here to discuss leadership lessons in the global digital economy. The Schar School is honored to have Mr. Krach with us today. And this marks the end of our Pioneer Robotic Process Automation Initiative webinar series for 2021, but the initiative will be soon announcing its 2022 webinar series. So I hope you will discover and leverage the various webinars, programs, and conferences that are offered at the Schar School. We are strategically located to capitalize on the intersection of government, technology, and the academic world. All our programs can be seen on the school's calendar. So thank you for being with us. We look forward to interacting with you for the remainder of this year and in the year ahead. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Professor and Director of the Center for Business Civic Engagement at the Schar School, David Rare. David?
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be with all you today. I am pleased and frankly honored to introduce our guest because he has had so many accomplishments which we want to talk about and which we want to get questions about as we go through the webinar. Keith Krach is a transformational leader and has been at the forefront of transforming multiple sectors, including robotics, engineering, commerce, education, philanthropy, economic statecraft, and even the way people sign their documents. Most recently, as Mark said, he served as the United States Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment, and for having a rare distinction of being unanimously confirmed by the US Senate. That's 100-0 for those who are counting. As the nation's top economic diplomat, Keith led the development of the bipartisan global economic security strategy and built the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies, resulting in the defeat of the Chinese Communist Party's CCP plan to control 5G, and now it serves as an enduring model for all areas of economic collaboration. Keith has made strengthening national security through trusted technology a central part of his bipartisan tenure, and he became the highest-ranking State Department official to visit Taiwan in more than 4 decades. Keith oversaw the largest U.S. onshoring in the history of America of TSMC, which further strengthened global tech security between the US and Taiwan. Now that's pretty amazing enough, but it goes on. Prior to his government service, Keith co-founded and served as CEO of the $40 billion Ariba company, which now transacts $3 trillion annually, and he did so again as CEO of DocuSign, by building the DocuSign Global Trust Network with more than 1 billion users and 1 million companies and in 188 countries around the globe. And I actually just refinanced my house and used it extensively. And I went from sitting with a lawyer for 2 hours to filling out the documents in about 15 or 20 minutes. And it was just amazing. So thank you, Keith, for doing that. You saved a lot of my time and my wife's time. Keith served as chairman of Purdue University, where he recently launched the Center for Technology Diplomacy, as Mark mentioned, a nonpartisan consortium focusing on the intersection of global tech, security, and advancing freedom. So welcome, Keith, to the Schar School of Policy and Government. We're really glad that you're here. And if we can start, let me begin by asking you about this new Center for Technology Diplomacy. What's your vision? What's the mission of the center? And what do you really want it to achieve going forward?
Well, thanks, David. And it's an absolute honor to be here. And I got to tell you, that's about the most thorough, kindest introduction I've ever had. So I really appreciate that. So the Center for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue is all about preserving and securing and advancing freedom through tech diplomacy and through the adoption of trusted technology. And, the new model, transformational model that we were able to create in terms of tech statecraft is to guard that freedom against authoritarianism. And we've assembled some of the foremost experts in terms of technology, in terms of government policy. We have members, for example, on our advisory board, like General Stanley McChrystal, 4-star general, Bob Hormats, who was the Undersecretary of State under President Obama, in the same role that I had, which is affectionately called the E in the State Department. Leon Panetta just joined as well. Dan Golden, the longest serving director at NASA. So it's a tremendous team, and it's really fast becoming the foremost authority on tech diplomacy.
And following this, even before the center, you've focused for a long time on linking U.S. diplomats with technology leaders in Silicon Valley. And can you talk a little bit about that as we move through the questions today? Because I think that's something I frankly wasn't aware of, but I understand, as many of our viewers and listeners do today, the importance of getting the technology right and how easy it is for people to crack the technology and basically to do bad things to the country.
Yeah, if you look at the Chinese Communist Party, they're a real and urgent threat to democracies around the world. And the battleground is technology. So in terms of combating that, this is where tech statecraft comes in. It takes those principles and those strategies from the tech sector's business principles and applies those with foreign policy tools. And what's really important is to be able to bring in experts, who've built companies and all those kind of things that you don't learn in the government, and combine that. And I had the good fortune of being able to do that. I brought 12 entrepreneurs, high-tech leaders, technologists, results-oriented execs into the State Department, combine them with some of the best foreign service officers there are, and these are some of the smartest folks in the world. They speak 4 to 7 languages. They work their tail off. Their true north is national security. And it was magical. And it was kind of that, that 1 + 1 = 10. And so we applied a lot of those principles, and that's really developed, this proven model that I think has resulted in an enduring model that bridges between a Republican administration and a Democratic administration, because it's totally bipartisan.
Yeah, which is excellent. I think America really is looking for these bipartisan solutions. And I know you talk a lot. So we have on our viewers today, undergraduate students, graduate students, technologists, people who live in Arlington, Virginia, may work in Washington, D.C. We have people, I think, from some of your former colleagues from the State Department may be on or will see it. So when you talk about the power of trust, what do you mean by that for people who may be unfamiliar with what you've been doing at State and what you've been doing at the center since then?
Well, if you think about trust, it's the most important word in any language. You do business with people you trust, you buy from people you trust, you partner with people you trust. When I was running DocuSign, I'd stand up on stage and I would say, hey, look, guys, we're not in the software business. We're in the trust business.
Yeah. Because
we deal with people's most important documents. Those are the ones that you sign. And, what was interesting at the State Department, one of the urgent missions we had was to defeat the Chinese Communist Party's master plan to control 5G. And 5G is all about the trust business because it's more than a smartphone. 5G is about sanitation systems, power grids, utility systems, manufacturing process, robotics, Internet of Things. And the interesting thing was that those trust principles were the ones that we use actually to deposition, their national champion, Huawei. And so when we talk about trust principles, those are things that are really grounded in democratic values. Things like integrity, transparency, reciprocity, accountability, respect for rule of law, respect for property of all kinds, respect for sovereignty of nations, respect for the environment, respect for human rights, respect for the press. And these are things that we honor in the United States and in the free world. But China does not. And they had been using those things for their strategic advantage. So in other words, David, if I'm competing against you, you have a company, I've got, and if I'm competing against you and I don't have to be transparent and I can use slave labor, I can steal your intellectual property, I can use coal-fired power plants, I am the, I don't have to obey the law, or I am the law, I can do bribes, I'm going to beat you every time.
Right.
And that's what they've been doing for 40 years. And, I'm a free trader and I believe in the free market, but when somebody comes to the market and doesn't play by the rules, it's no longer a free market. It's a fool's market. So you got to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did at the United States State Department, where we basically took those very principles and in one jujitsu move, used them in terms of our strategic advantage. In essence, what we did was we weaponized the very principles that protect our freedoms. And the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies was open to all countries. It didn't exclude any country forever. So in essence, what that did is that puts China in a catch-22, is that they either have to abide by these principles or they lose out on 70 to 80% of the world market.
Right, which the Communist Party would never allow them to do, even if someone someone in the leadership said, well, let's think about that. No way, it would never be allowed because their system is so totalitarian. So maybe stepping back a little bit, if we can, for a moment, Keith, because I came to being a professor via the private market, and I was in business like you, not as successful. I wish I had many of the ideas and basically had the courage and entrepreneurship that you had. But you started out working for your father in a small manufacturing operation in Ohio. So you do that, you go to college, you go to Purdue, you study engineering, you go to Harvard. What was like your insight when you thought about creating and co-founding Ariba? Did you have a moment when you said, hey, there's a market there that's not served, or there's a new idea that we can capture? What was kind of the thing that led you to the first success?
Yeah. So when we started Ariba, it was back in '96. So the internet was just coming out. And I had just left General Motors, probably about 6 years before that. And and a whole bunch of us had built a company in the design, engineering, software space. It was really successful. We sold it and then figured out, okay, what's the next thing we're going to do? And so when the internet came out, we saw that there was these guys talking about business to consumer electronic commerce. And so 7 of us got together. We go, we're B2B guys. How about business to business electronic commerce? So what we wrote was the first enterprise-wide application for the internet. And, basically it was all about disrupting the largest and the oldest industry in the world. And that's commerce. And what we did was we hooked up the buyers with the suppliers over the internet. And that ended up to be, at that time, it was the fastest growing software company in the world. We were growing 100% quarter over quarter. We were cash flow positive from the second quarter of existence. We went public after 2.5 years. And as you said, now the Ariba network has $3.7 trillion of commerce going through that network on an annual basis. That's more than Amazon, eBay, and Alibaba combined, and more than all the trade in the Western hemisphere. But there we had used a lot of the lessons we had used from the previous company in terms of those business principles, and in terms also of building and taking advantage of the network effect. And that's what really turbocharged our business.
Yeah, that's neat. That's neat. And then you jumped from there to DocuSign, which I think is like, as I said, it was almost a miracle for people because it's such a hassle to sign legal documents, and now you can basically do it and it's trustworthy on your computer. What made you look at electronic signatures?
Well, it's interesting because I had retired from Ariba and I got a call from, DocuSign was just starting out. It probably had about 10, 15 people, and I get the call, and this guy calls me up, and I go, hey, I hadn't heard from him in a few years. I go, hey, I'm not going back and doing the CEO and the chairman role again. You're guaranteed to be under the desk in a fetal position, once a month, guaranteed once a quarter. And anyway, he said, just take a look at it. So I took a look at it, and I thought to myself, most people would look at this and go, well, this is going to be a feature of Adobe someday.
Right.
And I looked at it and said, man, we could run the same play that we ran at Ariba in terms of building the network. And indeed we did with the DocuSign Global Trust Network. And, if you think about the value proposition that it unlocks, it's huge. And it's just, if you look at it on the surface, it's just so simple. But it's like looking at the top of the iceberg. Underneath is billions and billions of dollars of investment in terms of security and data privacy and all of that. And, the whole thing was about trust. So one of the things that we did is we facilitated an industry standard called the XDTM standard. We created a category called digital transaction management. And what that industry standard did is it quantified the level of trust in a digital transaction based upon privacy, security, enforceability, usability, interoperability, universality, scalability, and because that was really the key aspect. So it was really running that play. And one of the things, one of the business strategies we did was we created 4-dimensional partnerships with companies, and 4-dimensional partnerships are a customer, we integrate the product, we have a go-to-market strategy, and equity investor. And we did that with companies like Microsoft, Google, SAP, Salesforce, Deutsche Telekom, NTT, Intel, Dell, really the most powerful high-tech companies. And in essence, they were also probably the biggest threats in terms of competitors. Even FedEx invested in us. So, it was all about partnering, and that also turbocharged the network effect.
Yeah. Well, I think I read something, it's probably not recent, maybe it was in the Harvard case that you did, about being there first and keeping the first position. You get there first, that way you've staked out the future, as opposed to, and you don't really, if you want to go into industries, you can't be the third, the fourth, the fifth player, because you never can immense the mass needed to really accelerate your growth and to do well.
Yeah, if you look at it in terms of the object of the game, when you're building a high-tech company, is to be the category king. That's right. Because when you're the category king, you get 80% of the resources and 80% of the market capitalization. Everybody, 2, 3, 4, 5 fights over those scraps. And so there's a couple key principles in terms of being able to pull that off. The first one is to create the category and to name the category. And we did that at Ariba, and we did that at DocuSign. When you name it, you're the only one there. When you're the only one there, you're a leader.
Right.
I mean, it's probably not that simple, but that's a key principle. The other thing is that, in a high tech market, everybody wants to go with the leader. And in a rapidly changing market, leadership is not defined by size. It's defined by momentum, because everybody wants to skate to where the puck's going. And that allows startup companies to disrupt the big ones. If you looked at Ariba, biggest competitors would be SAP, Oracle, back then. And, with DocuSign, we disrupted Adobe, who invented the electronic document business. And so that's another key thing is momentum. And how do you get momentum? Well, you get it by a rolling thunder of announcements, wins, endorsements, all of that. And you've got to follow that up with a really strong product and great customer service.
Right. That's right. That's right. So you take all these private sector experiences and you move to the public sector. What are some of the leadership lessons that you applied, in particular for our students, that they could think about when they either finish college or finish their master's degrees or their PhDs and enter the workforce?
Well, here's a good one. And it was not intuitive, believe it or not, the State Department, but totally natural coming from the business sector. So, and I'll use this example of the Chinese Communist Party's master plan to control 5G. So the United States efforts, by the time we got the authorities, which was in March 2020, the United States government efforts had failed to stop. I mean, and really what was going on is that government officials were going over and banging on tables in other countries and saying, don't buy Huawei. It's important for our national security.
Right.
And, I just looked at that and I said, why don't we do something like treat these countries and these telcos like customers? And a customer's always right. And we've got to develop a customer value proposition in order for them to partner with us. And that was kind of radical thinking at the State Department, but
yeah,
totally natural for us. So, always having that customer focus. And in all the companies we built, we would always say that we measure our success by the customer's success, by the quantification of that customer's success, because it's all about that value proposition. And the ultimate way to be a category king is when your customers are singing your praise, particularly if they quantify that value proposition. So that for sure was a big one. The other obviously really big one was applying a trust. And what was interesting was, my first 60 bilaterals as undersecretary with foreign ministers, economic ministers, finance ministers, I meet with them and I'd say, hey, how's your relationship with China? And they go, well, they're a really important trading partner. And it almost seemed like every time they kind of look the other way and they go, but we don't trust them. That's what it rang bells in my head.
Yeah.
That trust is really key. So we use that as our strategic positioning. And that was another maybe foreign concept, I think, to the State Department. What is strategic position? Well, why do you do it? Strategic positioning is about deposition your competitor. And why do you do that? You do it to set traps. And what's the value of your strategic positioning? It's the delta between your position and your opponent. And it's got to be real. You got to be on that strategic high ground.
Yeah.
And so in other words, you don't have to be faster than a bear. You just have to be faster than the slowest guy. But and that's really what, that's what we use to do that jujitsu move. So trust is everything. I mean, so for your students, building that trust is everything, and applying, those principles of a customer value proposition is everything.
Yeah. Ironically, I think, I was a former lobbyist. I'm now teaching a lobbying class. And last night I made the point as we're approaching the end of our semester at the Shar School, that you always have to think of Congress as your customer, and
Yeah.
that they have to understand what you want. Otherwise, you really take the blame on yourself for not being able to articulate what your legislative priorities are. But they're the people, they don't want to meet with you because they're tired. You got to set another time for the meeting because it's all about them. It's not about you.
By
So
the
there's
way,
there's a little crossover there.
by the way,
And the same,
it's a huge crossover, right?
Right.
Because and you've got to have what I call that customer empathy. And so when you meet with them, you need to achieve vision lock. And the way to achieve that is to, what are your objectives? What are your challenges? What are your, to keep peeling back the layers of the onion, and then find out how it intersects with what you want to accomplish, right?
And I know, and I'll get back to more questions, but in the same class last night, I made the point that a lot of times, and this is probably true in business and in academia, the public sector, people forget, and it's all about them, and they make it all about them. I want this, I want that. We always have to think about the other person, maybe have a little non-hubris conversation on, it's really about you being successful. What can I do to help you achieve what you want or what you need?
By the way, you're so right. It's interesting because, at Ariba and at DocuSign, we would have 17 different levels of value proposition. And the final level was the ultimate, what we always try to achieve. And that is to get our customer promoted.
Right.
And so, we used to just, we would love that. We saw it happen before, our very eyes. And I hadn't really thought about it. This is about 20 years ago until, we had a customer user conference, and the guy was giving a talk, about its return on investment. And he said, here's the way I look at Ariba. He goes, it gets people promoted. And that's what you're trying to do, right? And by the way, for congressman, you want to get elected.
Right. Or move up to the Senate or run for president as former,
or be the president, whatever.
Yeah. Because it's always about them. So in the Clean Network, there's been an expansion. We now have gone to the Clean Cloud, the Clean Carrier, the Clean Cable. How far can we take the concept, and what else do we need to include as we're moving forward to make it super successful in defending our democratic values?
Yeah. So if you look at the Clean Network, and this was actually the question I got asked in my Senate confirmation hearing by Senator Coons. He said, what would be your strategy to combat China's economic aggression? And I said, well, what I would do is I would harness the three biggest areas of U.S. competitive advantage. And I would do that by rallying our allies and our friends, leveraging the innovation and resources of the private sector, and amplifying the moral high ground of democratic values. And that's what the Clean Network is. And that's what we use in the 5G area. And then also, we announced it's applicable to the area of cloud computing, underwater cable, which is really strategic. It was really effective there. A lot of that's classified, but it's really important. Clean apps, and also things like clean drones, clean currency. And then we also did an initiative in the clean infrastructure and clean energy area. And this was called the Blue Dot Network. And it's ongoing today. And what that is that is a unified and equitable alternative to China's one belt, one way toll road to Beijing, as one person put it. And that's formed the basis for the B3W, which President Biden got adopted by the G7 at their most recent meeting. So the area of clean infrastructure. So any area in terms of technology or economic collaboration, this strategy really
works.
fits.
Yeah. And I don't want to ask too much of a personal question, but what was the reaction from Huawei and the CCP after you're out there doing all this stuff and they're seeing what they perceive as their market share being greatly diminished?
Well, here's the interesting thing is that, it's really a government sponsored company. So
Yeah,
it's about the government, and they were following us. We went to 50 countries last fall, and they were literally following us around. And we would have press conferences and all those kind of things, and pressers with prime ministers. And, I'll never forget, we received the ambassador, Middle Eastern country, a U.S. ambassador goes, "Hey, you got to see this email." And so he sent this to us, and we had just had a press conference with all these journalists. And it was from the Chinese embassy to this journalist. And it said, "Don't write anything that Undersecretary Krach said. And, he's lying and da-da-da-da-da and all this stuff." It was like 2 pages. He just dug himself in a hole. It was really, it was a rookie job and look really defensive. And then the journalist, she writes back, "You're not in China anymore. You can't tell us what to write. United States Embassy wouldn't do that. They also wouldn't try to bribe us with masks and thermometers." And then he writes back, "Well, you can write whatever you want. Just don't write what Undersecretary." And he just kept going on and on.
Yeah, wouldn't
So
take
they
no
were
for an
bounced
answer.
around.
Yeah.
But the end result was a minute, after my term was finished, I got sanctioned along with my family from China. And, it was interesting because I was interviewed on TV that day, and they said, "Hey, do you think you're going to be sanctioned?" I said, "I already am." And I said, the way I look at it is that it's not for anything I said. It's for serving the country and getting results. And, I'm not going to bend a knee to Emperor Xi, and I don't think anybody should.
Right.
And anyway, if my father was alive today, he had that little 5-person machine shop, he'd say, "Well, Emperor Xi should give you, a medal or something like that and sleep with it under your pillow at night."
Yeah. So what's your next kind of ambitions for the center, for your work? How do you see yourself fitting back into the public sector so you continue all the great things you've done and people can learn from all your experiences?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot that can be done from the private sector side. I spent quite a bit of time in Washington talking with senators and congressmen. I'm going to be testifying from the U.S.-China Committee, and also with the current administration too, because this whole mission is nonpartisan. If you look at it's the biggest unifying bipartisan mission on Capitol Hill, but also a big part of what we're doing at the Center for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue is rallying the tech titans, because we really it's absolutely critical. You could draw the analogy to World War II. Why did we win the war? Such a big part of it was because the industrialists got rallied. I mean, Henry Ford built the aircraft. General Motors, who's Pierre DuPont was running at the time, he was also running DuPont. They converted all their factories to munition factories. Chrysler built the tanks. Henry Kaiser, who built the Golden Gate Bridge and the Hoover Dam, and be the big shipbuilder. And we've got to do it. And our struggle with China is going to be more of a cyber high tech thing. So that's a key part of that. And so I've got my friends out here in Silicon Valley. They understand that the Chinese Communist Party is not only a real and urgent threat to democracy, but also a real and urgent threat to their companies, because they're not just trying to compete, they're trying to put them out of business.
Right. I mean, anything they do, they're going to either put them out of business or steal their technology and use it. So they're all done. Yeah. I think we're going to go to some questions, and I'm going to ask Dornan to join us He's the co-founder of our robotic process automation initiative at George Mason. So if Dornan, you want to jump on and maybe go through any questions, if you have a question, make sure to put it in the chat box. But Dornan, do we have some questions?
Yeah, of course we do. We have a lot of them. First, Keith, good. Thanks for being here with us today, and thanks for transforming and improving our lives from so many perspectives, and also for the service to the country. If I may, I would like to really ask a question, and then we'll go to the audience. But we've been speaking a lot about business principles and trust, and how key this was to the success that you've been doing. Could you name some? I'm just curious, some people that they were critical you hired in your career that contributed to your success and the success of your organizations and at state, maybe in your service?
That were critical of going to serve the country, or critical of things I've done in my past, or
in your past. It was a specifically person that you thought it was critical in you hiring him or her that contributed to your success?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at being a CEO, the most important role is to build a high performance team, and it's all about hiring great people. And I've been blessed by being able to hire folks that are definitely way smarter than me. I think one of the great hires I think I've made in my life was when I was chairman of Purdue University and hired Mitch Daniels, who was the sitting governor of Indiana at the time, most popular two-term governor ever. He was former director of the OMB and youngest EVP at Eli Lilly. And, and now he's, the Wall Street Journal calls him the most innovative university president in America. So, that's an example. And, what's interesting is that, I've probably built about 7 companies in my career. And a lot of these guys have been with forever. There's one guy, Mark Carlson, we went to Purdue together. We started at General Motors together, and he's been there all steps along the way because, and we kind of kid each other. We're getting a new situation, new opportunity, or building a new business. It's like, all right, let's just add water and stir. Because, so many of these principles are universal, and these things aren't written in a book. So
Right.
what you're able to do is kind of do some experiment, see what doesn't work, see what works. And if it works, it's a cumulative effect. And you just keep putting arrows in your quiver.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, replicating it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how about a question from the other one, the audience? Here is one that I would like to address, and says, what leadership lessons were you able to use at state, and what lessons did state leave you with during your experience there?
Well, I'll tell you what, I learned let me start off by what I learned at the State Department, because I learned a lot. I'd never been in government before. I never spent a lot of time in Washington, never been involved in political campaigns. And the thing that I learned is that what the federal government is all about, the North Star, is national security. And I'm embarrassed to say I really didn't know that. I thought, I don't know, maybe collect taxes, something like that. But it's all about national security. And what I learned and what I saw was, democracy is a 250-year experiment, and you have to fight, scratch, claw every day to preserve that, because it's an unnatural act. It's against all the laws of physics. The natural order of things is the bad king, the dictator, or the emperor. And if it wasn't for the United States, there'd probably be 100 countries that wouldn't have anywhere close to the freedoms that they have right now. I think that was one of the big ones. The other big one is how great, civil servants and these career officers and foreign service officers are. And, to the point where I tell people, just like when you see somebody who served in the military, you thank them for their service. Well, if you see somebody who serves in the government, you thank them for their service, because they really are, they say civil servants. I mean, it's a great thing. The other thing, and this is, I wish I had this experience earlier because, in building companies, there gets a point where you go overseas and you take a new category, take a new product, maybe you get up to about 300 people, then it's time to go international. And when I never once thought about, as I took like B2B commerce overseas and DocuSign, was calling up the United States State Department or Commerce Department because they can really, really help you. And that's one of my big missions here too, is to make sure that companies realize, look, man, these guys are here. It's their job to help you out. Because when you're going overseas, it's all about building trusted relationships. And these guys can open the doors and give you all kinds of credibility. So that I definitely, I learned. In terms of some of the stuff that we brought to the State Department, I think it's a lot of the Silicon Valley strategy. So in other words, treat people like customers. It's all about leadership, and leadership is defined by momentum. And also that speed is the ultimate weapon. That is, that's just a key part. The other thing too is, and I say this all the time, is the United States government is the worst organization I've ever seen in my life in terms of marketing, and it has the best product. So I would always say, that's an insult and a compliment all in one. So, things like strategic positioning and marketing those wins and all that, using that strategically, I think that was one of the real important lessons. And also putting trust, I think, front and center. That sometimes gets forgotten in DC.
Yeah, no, thank you. And if I may, there's another one actually that it's related to this here. And you alluded a little bit earlier that maybe you're thinking of something else, but for never serving in government and being involved in politics, as you mentioned before, how did you feel like you defeated Huawei so quickly after previous US government efforts were not that successful? What would you say on that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to treat these guys like a customer and the trust area. But also another big one is this, that, and this was also, they said, hey, this is pretty unconventional, was that when we were going around talking to governments, we also talked to the CEOs of foreign telcos. Because if those guys were going to buy from trusted sources, then we didn't even need to talk to the governments. And if you could get 3 out of the 4 in a country to do it, it really helps you make the case. And that's just never been done. We have relationships with a lot of these guys because a lot of them, like for example, had invested in DocuSign, like Deutsche Telekom or Telstra or NTT, and those kind of things. The other, and we call this a multi-tier go-to-market strategy. And so in addition to calling on the countries, or excuse me, the telcos, we start at the top of the food chain. So the first place I went was to NATO. And when I went there, the deputy secretary, good Romanian, Giovanna, he goes, Keith, we need a clean NATO network because we need these 5G systems in peacetime or wartime, and we can't have some countries with trusted ones, some untrusted ones. You're only as strong as your weakest link. And so he was really a great ally. Then I literally walked across the street almost and went to go visit my old friend Terry Baton, who I knew when he was CEO of Bull and CEO of French Telecom, who was the EU commissioner for technology. And he had developed a thing called the 5G cybersecurity toolbox. And we combined that with our efforts, made the 5G clean cybersecurity toolbox. And so now all of a sudden you got the EU, you got NATO, and then I also went to the 3 Cs nations, which are 12 nations, most of them former Soviet bloc. And all of them endorsed the clean network. We all partnered all together. So now it was not an America alone strategy, and people support what they help create. And what that enabled was that created a security blanket for the China's intimidation, retaliation, retribution, because there's strength in numbers and there's power in unity and solidarity.
Wow, that's amazing. And just to continue that, shout out to the Romanian folks. They were also the first country who signed the Memorandum of Understandings of 5G cooperation, isn't it?
Say you best, you bet. I just said I love you in Romania. Yeah, absolutely, Jordan.
Thank you, thank you. Well, there's one more question, David, and then I'll turn it back to you.
Okay.
It says, what are the biggest problems that need to be solved in technology leadership?
In technology leadership?
Yes.
I think, the thing that makes it really tough is the 90-day shot clock when you're a public company. In other words, you got to focus short term in a lot of cases. Now, the real successful ones focus long term. And the reason why that's important is because, a lot of these companies are torn between how they handle China and do they hand over their technology. And by the way, if you build a plant in China, you're not just handing the blueprints, you're giving them the process engineer and teaching their people how to come and compete with you. So a little bit longer term view. And to understand, one of the things I did was I brought Secretary Pompeo out to Silicon Valley for 4 days in January 2020. He doesn't go anywhere for 4 days, but I brought him out and kicked it off with a dinner at my home with 36 of the top CEOs. You recognize all their names, Silicon Valley. And most of these guys have been over here before, a safe environment. I had them all go around a room and they all told their China horror stories. I think it was cathartic for a lot of them. And, at the end, one of the things I said is, look, out here we say corporate responsibility, social responsibility. It's also national security and global economic security. And to have the technology leaders, understand that. The other big thing in the area is that in terms of data privacy, data flows, security, the rules of the road are yet to be written. And that is going to take all three branches of government, along with the private sector, along with our allies, to be able to do that. Because when you look at, for example, China, what I call their great one-way China firewall, where all the data goes in for their malign use, but none goes out. And reciprocally, all the propaganda goes out, but the truth doesn't come in. They've chosen to bifurcate the internet. And so we've got to come up with a strategy because they got the heads I win, tails you lose kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Doran. And Keith, I'm really glad to hear that Silicon Valley CEOs are interested in national security. Unfortunately, we hear a lot in the media about being focused on short-term profits. They'll go to China, and I keep thinking, closing my eyes going, okay, they're going to have all your stuff soon because they basically steal it. But do you think the younger CEOs are being more realistic about China these days, even more than the older CEOs, as they're seeing China kind of throw their weight around the world now and looking for anything they could do to advance the CCP's ideology or interests?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I had that dinner at my home, and after everybody left, I sat down with my chief of staff, and I said, you could literally put these guys into 3 buckets. One is, hey, we're not going to China. We tried China. We got burned in China. They're the enemy. Then there's another group, and it wasn't 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but this was the smallest group. We're just chinging in China. We don't care. And then there's that middle group where it's like, I thought that was happening to me, or I never thought about that. That happened to you, and tell me more, kind of thing. So there's different buckets, but I think probably the older CEOs are a little more wise because they've been burned, to be honest with you. I think some of the newer folks, they don't know. And, they see a lot of money going into Chinese startups.
Right.
You've got venture capital companies like Sequoia that's financing the semiconductor business for China, or at least a good part of it. And China's seen this coming for a long time. And a big part of it is the capital flows. What people don't understand is the U.S. citizen, the average American investor, has financed China's human rights abuses, like the genocide in Xinjiang. It financed the Chinese military buildup because in their pension funds are these emerging index funds that have China stocks buried all in there. And that was a big effort that we had, was trying to educate university endowments, pension funds, all those kind of things. And so the capital, because that's one thing they need hard currency, and we've been financed. We finance their One Belt, One Road, and it's one thing if a citizen decides he wants to do something like that, but most citizens don't realize what their pension funds are being invested in.
Right. They're just waiting for the rate of return because they want to see themselves improved. And no one ever says, well, here's where the stocks or here's where the money's being invested. Because I'm sure a lot of people would raise their hands and go, can we find another fund or another investment opportunity? Because it allows me to sleep better at night.
Yeah. I mean, in these big index funds, particularly BlackRock is the biggest one, that, they finance these solar panel companies in Xinjiang. And why are they in Xinjiang? Well, they can use the slave labor there, but it's also home to the world's two biggest coal-fired power plants, because manufacturing a solar panel is incredibly energy intensive. So in other words, the amount of energy a solar panel puts out in 3 years, you need that equivalent amount to manufacture it. So they want to be the low-cost producer because they've flooded everybody out. They have a monopoly on solar panels. And what they're doing is they're using coal-fired power plants to own the market around the world.
Right.
And that's the inconvenient truth of the inconvenient truth.
Yeah. And then arguing that they're aligned on clean energy and green technologies because they're producing solar panels.
Well, yeah. And, here's the thing is that we did an analysis. There's not one agreement that China has kept that is not to their benefit. And, if you don't believe me, just ask the people in Hong Kong, right? I mean, it's kind of like they just don't honor them, just like they don't honor intellectual property rights or rule of law, all of that. And so it's almost like a one-way agreement. It's like, we got you guys to sign that. We know you're going to honor it. We don't have to.
Yeah. And I know, Keith, you may remember that I'm an economist by training.
Yeah.
And the market, which I love, gives a lot of people opportunities, but often people forget there's a moral kind of minimum of the market. To your point, you don't cheat, you don't steal, because otherwise, if people are cheating and stealing, not being trustworthy, the market's going to collapse because no one's going to believe in it and no one's going to be able to do business.
You're so right. And, I wrote an op-ed, based on globalization and the world is flat. And I believe in all of that. Like I said, I'm a free trader. But what that assumes is there's no bad actors. And there's been one that not only has been really good at it, but has done a great job of concealing it, deceiving it, doing a head fakes on it, and just become powerful that way. And so, globalization is a great thing for China. But I mean, when they can steal anybody's intellectual property and they don't have to be transparent and they can subsidize the hell out of stuff and give bribes, well, that's not really a free market. It is a fool's market.
Right, right. And they're totalitarian too. So they don't really want to listen to people who have disagreements because it's our way or you go to prison or you get something bad happens to you. Yeah.
Oh, totally. You know, what I saw is they have no regard for human life and no regard in terms of freedom of the press or anything like that. And they are the law, right?
Yeah.
And you could see what they've done to the pro-democracy people in Hong Kong.
Well, Keith, we're coming. Okay, go ahead, Dornan.
No, I just wanted to, before we close, I think there's a very important question here, especially from our student audience, Keith. Maybe in this global order that we live in today, what would be your advice to, to the students of George Mason as they move forward in their careers? Some takeaways that you believe it's very important to keep in mind these days in this fast-changing, transformative world?
Sure. Well, the first thing I do is I'll give some general advice, and that's this. Don't be afraid to jump in water over your head because you're going to learn how to swim. I mean, I've been doing it my whole life. And, after a while, and, we call it scary fun. And after a while, you get such an adrenaline rush, becomes addicted. And, maybe that's the first sign of a transformational leader. So don't be afraid of that. And also, one of the most important things is whatever organization you go to, whatever organization you start, the most important thing is all about having a good set of values. And that's one of the most important lessons I learned early on in my career, because I went to a company that didn't have that. And I'll tell you what, I swear on my grave, that would never happen again. So that's really important. I think the other thing too, as this was great about George Mason students, is getting experience in both the public and the private sector. I wish I would have had experience serving my country earlier on in my career, because there's just so many opportunities, and we really need it flowing both ways. We really, really do. There's not enough private sector people. And when I say private sector, I mean value creation industries. I'm not talking about, there's plenty of lawyers and plenty of investment bankers, but I'm talking about, which I look at as value transfer, but value creation, manufacturing, high tech. I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing I would say is global experience, right? It's a global world. And I think that's, if you can live overseas or get experience in that, because that's just going to grow and grow and grow.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Dornan, for that question. I'm sure our students will appreciate that. Thank you, Keith, for spending an hour with us today. We really appreciate this. We look forward to following the progress of your center. Likewise, hopefully we can work together to look at our mutual benefits and kind of spread the word on this trust, on building a market that's based upon a value system which enhances not only wealth, but humankind as well. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate partnering with you. All right.
Thank you, Keith. All the best. Bye. Thank you to all for the audience.
Say you best.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thanks.